Hello and welcome back, future scientists. I'm Mr. K with Mississippi Public Broadcasting. We're going to continue our lecture today talking about evolution, and specifically what we're going to talk about is some evidence that supports the theory of evolution. So hopefully you are as curious about this stuff as I am. Please just try your best to follow along, and I'll give you the best explanation that we have that supports the theory of evolution, and then we'll get some practice with this later down the road. So let's go ahead and see what we're talking about today. So I wanted to go ahead and show you a couple of different pieces of evidence we have that support the theory of evolution. The first thing I wanted to talk about is something known as homologous structures. So what I want you to do, just look at this picture real quick, and you can just talk to yourself, ask yourself, do you see any similarities in between these limbs? So what we see here, these are the limb bones of different organisms. You can see we have a human arm, we have the leg of a dog, we have an arm of a bird, and the fin of a whale. Do you see any similarities in between these different limbs? What you might notice, and the color definitely helps here, is that all of these organisms, and in fact all tetrapods, which are four-limbed animals, all tetrapods have the same arrangement of their limbs. You can see in the top, especially for humans, it goes one bone, two bone, many bones, and digits. So in all of these organisms, you can see at the top there's that dark brown. That would be the humerus in humans. That's kind of our forearm bone, okay? And then a little lower down, you see the tan and the red. It's the same in all of them. That is the radius and the ulna, so those are the two limbs in the lower arm for humans. And then you can see that where the wrist bones are in humans, there's a lot of little yellow bones there, and then it ends in the brown digits, so like the fingers and toes. So I have four animals up here, but actually all tetrapods have the same arrangement of limb bones. Okay, and I wanted to talk about what that means to scientists a little bit. So these homologous structures are a strong piece of evidence of a shared common ancestry among tetrapods. Remember, tetrapods are four-limbed animals. All tetrapods share the same arrangement of four limbs, and all limbs, it goes one bone, two bones, many bones, and digits. So you have one bone up here in the top of the arm, two bones down in the middle, and then many bones down in the hand and the foot area. Again, the same thing with the DNA that I talked about last time. For scientists, it's just more likely that this arrangement developed once and stuck around. That's more likely than each individual organisms arrived at this arrangement independently of each other. And what's really going on here is that the first tetrapod to leave the water, there were a lot of different examples of these. The one I'm most familiar with is called Tiktaalik, that one of those first organisms that left the water and started to live its life on land probably had this arrangement of bones. And because they were the first ones that showed up on land, it just kind of stuck around as it evolved into all of these different types of life that we see on the planet today. If you're interested in this, I just wanted to share this with you. If you're interested in how humans got to where we are today, there's a really interesting book called Your Inner Fish. It's by Neil Shubin. He's an evolutionary biologist and a paleontologist. In his book, Your Inner Fish, it tracks his amazing discovery of the species known as Tiktaalik, which was one of those first organisms that left the water and started living on land. And it also tracks the amazing journey from our fish-like organisms to how we got here today. And some of our fishy characteristics are still around today. And he talks about that in his book. If you don't want to read it, there is a video on YouTube that talks about it as well. So just remember this, Your Inner Fish, and you can go and do some independent research if you're interested in this stuff. Okay? The next thing I wanted to talk about is something known as embryology. Okay, embryology is the study of embryos. What I want you to do, I have a little challenge here for you. You can see that these are depictions of a lot of different embryos. We've got a fish and a salamander, we got a turtle and a calf and a rabbit and a human. And so what I want you to do, look at all of these different organisms, look at all of these different embryos, and I want you to try to pick which one you think is human. And then I'll reveal these bars and it'll become a little bit easier as we go. So go ahead, take a close look at these different embryos, and I want you to just ask yourself, which one do you think is the human? Is it on the far left, the far right, one of the two in the middle? Just go ahead and pick one, and then let's see if you can tell these organisms apart just based off of their embryo. Okay, so that would be very, very early in its development. As they gestate and they start to grow in the womb a little bit more, they would go from looking like that to starting to look something like this. So look at these pictures. Some of them are a little bit easier to tell. I think out of these pictures I could probably make out the salamander and the fish, but a lot of these are hard. I still definitely couldn't pick out the human among these. So just take a guess. Maybe are you sticking with the same one that you picked earlier, or are you going to change it to something else? And I'll reveal it here in just a second. Okay, so as the embryos continue to gestate in the womb, they will become more specialized. They'll go from looking something like this to looking something like this at the bottom. And there you can see going from left to right, it goes fish, salamander, tortoise, chick, hog, cow, rabbit, and a human. Now at this point, I think we could tell which one's which, but definitely in those first two rows, that was very, very difficult. This is a form of evidence that supports the theory of evolution. It's called embryology. Like I said earlier, embryology is the study of embryos. Embryos are unborn or unhatched organisms. As an embryo grows, its structures and features become more specialized. Embryos across species have similarities that are not visible when the organisms are fully formed. One example in all vertebrate embryos are structures called pharyngeal arches or gill arches. In fish, these gill arches would become gills, but in mammals, these develop into the ears and the jaws. And again, this is a piece of evidence that supports the theory of evolution. It shows how we all kind of share a similar beginning. And then as we grow and start to gestate more in the womb, we become more specialized to fit that specific organism that will eventually become. Okay, the last piece of evidence that I wanted to talk about that supports the theory of evolution today is something known as vestigial structures. You can find these all over the place, but I have one good example that I'll talk about. So what is a vestigial structure? Well, a vestigial structure are old body structures that seem to have lost their original functions in the species over an evolutionary timescale. Now what I have down here, this is a depiction of a whale fossil. And you'll see that a lot of this is making sense with what we would expect for a whale fossil to have. It has bones in its fin, it's got a rib cage, it's got a backbone. We know it's a vertebrate, so it definitely needs that spinal column back there. It's got these large jaws because of how big its mouth is. But one thing that kind of sticks out to me, look at that little shape above the letter A there. That is a hip bone. And whales, if you find a whale carcass, you'll find that they do have hip bones. Now, why would a whale have a hip bone? You can see it doesn't have any back limbs back there. It's not like it's got fins back there that it's trying to control. Well, if you go back far enough, actually whales have not lived their whole life in the water. If you go back millions and millions of years, you would find that whales, their closest relative today is the hippo. And at one point, whales, or I guess I should say the ancestor of whales, lived their life on land. And they just spent a lot of time swimming, kind of like hippos do today. But as they left the land and started to live more exclusively in the water, those hind limbs proved to be a problem. It was slowing them down. They couldn't swim as far or as fast. And so what happened is these hind limbs started to disappear, and instead they started to form this, the tail that was so much better for swimming. And so this is a vestigial structure. It kind of tells a story of what this organism used to be like. It didn't always live in the water. At one point, it was more like a hippo, where it lived on land and it just was swimming a lot. And we can find that evidence in this fossil bone. This is a hip bone. When it was living on land, it had those back limbs. It had legs back here, and it needed a hip bone and those bones to kind of support it. But now you don't see it. You don't see those limb bones back here, but the fossil did stick around. So that's an example of a vestigial structure. So thank you so much for following along with me today. Your teacher has some other things for you to practice on. Make sure to give that your best effort, and I hope everybody has a great day.